Okay, so welcome everyone. Since we're upstairs, get outside, we have to get through that door in either direction to stairs and or the elevator. Or the area of refuge at the top of the elevator. So for the agenda, are there any changes suggested?
So we just had one, I sent out by email a notice for an regulation amendment for Williston. That's something that neighboring municipalities notify each other about upcoming public hearings on amendments. So that is the same as you have in other, you've received for other municipalities, like there was a Burlington one recently, we've had Colchester, etc. So just putting that on the agenda under other business. I sent it after the packet, but it is, the public hearing is before our next planning commission meeting, so it'll be good to have on the agenda for tonight.
Okay.
And no action required, just notice to the planning commission.
It's just the DOB.
Yes.
So how does it work with the attendance of Duncan Shredding someone? Do you do that differently? The last bunch of weeks, we've been able to like do a thing.
I can sign for Duncan and just write online. But that reminds me, any vote you take will have to be a roll call vote because it's online. But I will grab that sign-in sheet.
Roll call vote unless, if it's not unanimous.
If it's not unanimous.
Well, I'm not sure how much voting we're doing, but we can do that, obviously. Okay, we basically just went over the exit instructions, which you do know, and the reminder that there is the Williston public notice thing in our email. To start with. Okay, so open to the public for items not related to the agenda. If you are joining us online, you can unmute or turn your video on. We are not monitoring the chat, so if at any point you're trying to get us, you can raise your electronic hand or turn on the video. I'm not hearing anything under the open to the public for items not related to the agenda. We'll move on. Do we have any announcements? Yes, one thing to note is that our schedule continues to be off through this month, so we do not have a meeting next week, but there is one the following week of the 16th. I will miss that one, but I think Duncan is lined up to chair, giving the affirmative. Any other announcements? I'm not hearing any other announcements, so we can move on to the
I have a
item.
couple of staff items.
Okay, yes.
Just a couple of quick things. One, last night was the first presentation of the budget to the city council. They'll be having maybe 3 more, I believe, on the 15th of this month. And then the first 2 meetings in January before they wrap up the budget. As our city manager says, it is the most important policy document of the year. So they're all public meetings, and all the materials are available online. So that's the first one. Second one, yesterday I participated in the site visit from the Land Use Review Board. That's the new state board that reviews regional plans, and ultimately same board that would look at our Tier 1A application. They came to Winooski, to the Regional Planning Commission's offices, and the Regional Planning Commission gave a presentation all about the regional plan, all about the future land use map, and then they did a bunch of virtual site visits, basically zooming in on various different digitally different areas of the county to that were sort of interesting case studies of why they made a decision one way or the other. And it was really positive feedback, and there was a lot of appreciation from the board of the amount of collaboration between the municipalities and the Regional Planning Commission, and a lot of accolades on that. So their feedback will be due by the 22nd of December on the plan and the map. And so we may be hearing if there's adjustments that they are recommending prior to their final vote, and we'll see where it goes from there. And then lastly, exciting thing from this past year's budget, being enacted in intentional in the second half of this year, is as of January 4th, the library will be open on Sundays. Yeah, so
9 to 3.
9 to 3. Presumably AM to PM.
Yeah, right. For all the late readers in town.
I've got to say, I think that is really great. There's so many Sundays that I'd really like to go. So,
I think it's gonna be
yeah,
very well attended and
That's really
participated,
great.
so it's really exciting. Oh, and also, also in the library, as of November 24th, so last week, thanks to a partnership with the Library Foundation, the library now offers both in the library and then remotely, if you can get a daily pass for the New York Times subscription. So it's a substantial investment by the Library Foundation to give all of our residents access to that. So
And one more thing that the library has now, due to the donation from Keith Epstein, they have at least 3 infrared imagers if you want to do cold air study of your house. So you can check them out, take them home. Scan them. I don't know how to work, but
are you recording?
yeah, that's, I was recently surprised at their online, both audiobooks and electronic books, but also there's magazines too. Like it was just kind of a larger collection than I realized.
Including but not limited to Consumer Reports, which is great.
Right, any other staff items? Okay, we can get started on item number 5, which is the Bedrock removal noise regulation, research and summary of recommendations. So we talked about this a few months back, following adoption of the new part of regulations, LDRs, that pertain to this. And there's a few documents in our packet, starting with the research summary, and then kind of moving on to a staff recommendation based on a lot of research. I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to go through first at a staff level, or if you wanted
If it
to.
would be okay, I'd love to take a little step back and just give a little talk about, I think, a little bit more than we have in the last few months about the project, the main project that has been the driver of this whole question, and if that's okay. So it's not about specifically these rules, but I think it's important for us to sort of clear the air on that. So, I think we know the primary source of what we're looking at is what happened at Long Drive. There were chiseling that took place over 2+ summers. That was extreme. It was ongoing, and nobody wants to see that repeated or anything resembling repeated. And so I think, acknowledging that as a very start. I think we all know, just so we're clear on these regulations, that the bedrock removal standards that were adopted in September and anything we're talking about here don't directly affect Long Drive itself, because that neighborhood, per the court order, is subject to the regulations we have from 2002. So we're really talking about, the future. But I think it is important that we take a step back and sort of look to make sure that our policies and procedures are in place to make sure that never gets repeated. So we did take some time to look back at that and what happened, what led to it, what have we done, and what can we do to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So it was in some ways sort of a perfect storm of events that led to an extreme circumstance and an outlier from what we have typically seen. And Nick's research, does identify some of the work that we've seen elsewhere. Bedrock removal in one form or another is pretty common practice in the city, and we have not heard very much about it, frankly, over the years, except in this case. And And in isolated instances of, people starting too early or something like that, and that gets clarified in the moment. When it's been well managed, we've heard very little from folks. If anything, we occasionally hear positive things about developers communicating well with folks. So what happened here? I think that, like I said, it's kind of a perfect storm. There was a court order. That's the first thing. The project was denied by the Development Review Board back in 2002 for impacts to wildlife areas. That was appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that a portion of our regulations was constitutionally invalid for vagueness. And results of that were that were a few things that maybe didn't play out for a long time. One was that as part of the arguments that were made, there was a very complex tree preservation plan that was submitted and approved by the court. A second is that the court, in issuing when the Supreme Court made their ruling and they gave it back to the environmental court, the E-Court approved the preliminary plat and sent it to the city's Development Review Board for final plat review with a very, very, very narrow authority of what they could look at. They basically could look at a very small handful of things that are not dealt with at preliminary plat. And that's what they were limited in their authority to look at by the court. The project, interestingly, so, up until very, very recently, the subject of blasting was regulated solely by Act 250. That project was approved for a blasting plan in its Act 250. The approval that they got was for the infrastructure, but not the house sites initially. The house sites would be subject to their own amendments, essentially by Act 250. There were some somewhat outlier conditions in that, which included a condition that pre and post blast surveys for all structures located within 1,500 feet of the blasting activity needed to take place. That is larger than is typical. Typical, it's 500 to 750 feet, including other projects in our own community. What impact that had in the developers' decision making, we don't know directly, but they implied that that was a lot. It was a large geography. Third, oh, and of course, we did not regulate the subject at the time, so we had nothing on it. There was nothing in the permit that talked about chiseling. And I think, when the chiseling started to take place, there was a gap. There was nothing in our regulations and nothing in our decision that talked about removal of bedrock at all. And the Act 251 talked about restrictions and limitations related to blasting, but had nothing was said about chiseling. So from an enforcement perspective, Act 250 didn't feel like they had a thing because they weren't not complying with the condition about the blasting, which is frustrating, but it's where that was. I think next, in the spring and summer of 2020, the duration of the removal was deeply underestimated. First by the developer, and then frankly, I think by us, as they said to us, a few more days, and then a few more days, and then a few more days. And I think everybody was, well, I can't speak for the developer. I can say that we were hopeful that that was going to be the case, and it was not. And that was, I think that's what I can say about that. There wasn't a straightforward alternative that the city had, because there wasn't a specific, here's a condition that you're not meeting. If the building were being built too close to a property or too tall, we could say that's not what you were approved for. And so there wasn't a straightforward, here's the way that we can address this and here's how it can be fixed. But that, that doesn't make it better. I'm just acknowledging that. We did look at whether we could issue tickets, whether we could seek a court order, each of which at the time seemed like it would take a really long time to take effect, and our authority was unclear. Later, much later, the city, through the city manager, with support from the city council, did on a single house site, seek a court order for a nuisance violation. And, with the benefit of hindsight, maybe that's something that should have been pursued a lot sooner. We're a learning institution, and, I think that's a reality. In that instance, interestingly, the city sought an immediate injunction. The court said that, in that instance, that it was appropriate that both the city and the developer of that project, that single house site, should have the ability to submit documentations and make arguments before the court was going to rule. Ultimately, in that instance, the chiseling was completed before that court action could start. And so that's sort of an interesting, also, learning experience, that even when you go in that direction, it doesn't mean things can happen instantaneously. We did explore some alternatives with the developer as it was going on. One was that was considered was to blast out all of the house sites at once. So this was post when a lot of the work of the infrastructure was done. But to finish that up and do all the house sites at once, the developer had expressed that, that might make it a little bit more cost effective, rather than doing each one individually. The challenge with that at the time, at least, was that, with the court order ruling and the backdrop of the regulations that were completely silent on it, the administrative officer at the time determined that they didn't know that they had the authority to allow that to happen, and to allow the sort of substantial permanent impact to the land without having full zoning permits for the entirety of the development, and not being sure that the house would even be built the way that it was being blasted out without knowing anybody. But that felt, looking back at that, kind of a catch-22. On the one hand, it's not a project that necessarily was going to be built that way and could have a permanent impact on the land without a home. On the other hand, it would be a more cost-effective way of removing the bedrock, and maybe would have led to fewer impacts. The tree preservation handbook played a role. I don't want to overstate it, but it had strict limitations on disturbance, so that could have played a role in the subject. So those are a lot of the factors that we came across with this. So what's different now? Because that's really the key question, right? What's different today? What's different than what you're looking at? So I think, first and foremost, the 2025 regulations that were adopted a couple of months ago require an assessment upfront, where it's reasonably foreseeable, or where the DRB has evidence to think that it is reasonably foreseeable. The regulations require a plan that is locally approved for bedrock removal beyond 40 hours. So it allows us to have a time frame associated with it. It requires that a plan exist, which means that there is then, and it's not just for blasting, it is for bedrock removal, which means that there is something for the administrative officer to adhere to specifically, and to call out on. As I said, I think we are a learning institution, and looked back on the subject of enforcement, and how even if, let's say, tickets had started, tickets under Vermont law start at a pretty low number. They start at something like $100 a day. It is inconsequential to a larger development. But if you could go back in time and say, well, 4 months at some point starts to add up in money because it's, it becomes $800 a day. And, while each day that's that in and of itself is probably still inconsequential over time, that starts to both add up financially and make a case for other modes of enforcement as well as to somebody not, adhering, not paying attention to it, frankly. We've had several projects advance in the years since, even with limited authority, or really, sort of tangential authority, the Development Review Board and staff have been able to pay much closer attention to the subject of bedrock removal. So and I think the development community has been aware of this, and so several projects have locally reviewed and approved blasting plans or bedrock removal plans, even before you adopted your regulations. What the regulations did in September was to give direct authority for it. We were not challenged as to whether we had the authority in the last few, because I think the developers wanted to work with the DRB, but it is much better when you actually have direct authority to do it in the event that it's challenged. And then we're going to discuss tonight some possible improvements to it further. So that's kind of what I wanted to give as an overview. Thank you for taking a few minutes as a turn on that. Is there anything that folks would like to ask about those ones? And
Yeah. A general question. The problem with that particular development was it that the developer underestimated the amount of labor involved, or he had no idea of the volume of material that they had to remove?
I mean, it's hard to be in their head, right, Michael? So I don't know exactly what. I think it was an underestimation of the amount of it, the extent of it, the labor involved with it, the hardness of the rock itself. They said that to us a couple of times because different types of rock can either break easily or less easily. And I also don't want to overemphasize this in any way. But it was the spring of 2020 when this started, and a lot of people didn't know a lot of stuff as to what was happening. And I don't want to, give that as an excuse, but an awareness.
But they need to know, they need to know the geology, which would have taken care of the hardness. And I think they need to make an estimate in their proposal of the volume of material that's going to be that they need to remove. Guessing at the time, they can probably estimate the time based on how much they have to do.
Right. And we didn't have that.
And I've read a couple of other places where an estimate of the volume of material to be removed is part of the application.
Right. And so for Long Drive specifically, the administrative officer for the individual house site since that time has required that. Whether they have the authority to or not, they have just said, we're doing this and we're requiring this, and the developer has agreed because of the history. That's not a good setup to do it outside of the regulatory authority, but I think both the developer and the administrative officer recognize in this instance, that's critical.
But we just need to think about that.
Yeah. Look, just one of the many things that should be added to the plan. I think there are quite a few details that should be fleshed out. And that was really the reason that I recall that we kind of sent it back, was to put more bones on it. And I think one of the things that we do still need to find a way to put in there is some sort of limit as to what sort of noise at the property line is too much. One of the problems, had they been doing that development in the middle of a farm field somewhere and the nearest property line was 1,000 feet away, it wouldn't have been nearly as much of a problem. If they were doing that in a light industrial area where all the other companies around there are making a lot of noise, it wouldn't have been such a big deal. But could you imagine if they're doing that right next to a medical facility or a school or a nursing home or a couple of thousand houses? The impact is definitely location specific. And I think the plan has got to address that in some way. And it's the second question is, have we asked for a legal opinion on whether the existence of this bedrock removal language precludes us from the city, from going after somebody on a nuisance ordinance violation?
So there has been, without the city council and city attorney have had conversations on that subject. Because it's because it's in the context of a singular thing, it was an executive session conversation. But there has been discussion of that subject.
Well, from a broader standpoint, if we don't put noise caps in the bedrock removal language that we have, is there a fallback for the nuisance ordinance? Or by the fact that we said you can do this and there's no cap on it, can they then use that in court to say, they said it's okay?
So, Adam, thank you for the clarification. What I would say is that, that there was a little bit of discussion about the interplay between a nuisance ordinance and a land development regulation. One does not preclude the other one, is what the city attorney had stated. At the same time, a specific approval under one would be important evidence to a court on whether the other one is being exceeded or not. So a court would look to, let's say, a regulation and say, well, if they got a full approval and there was full knowledge of everything that was going to be in there, then the city as a singular entity, that would carry some weight in a conversation as to whether something is being exceeded.
That would be my assumption too. So I think language has to be in there. 80 dB for an entire day at a residential property line is too much. 70 would probably be too much next to a school or a nursing home. I mean, there are limits where we just have to say, find another way. As you said, one of the reasons why they did it this way was because blasting was more expensive. They didn't want to go out further. Maybe the trees, but they knocked down enough of those on their own anyway. It was mostly because they didn't want to pay for the engineering studies.
Yeah, I wonder in retrospect whether they would concur that after it was all done, whether in the end that was the right call.
Absolutely.
Not even politically, financially,
Yeah.
whether in the end but you know, I don't get to look at their books, so.
I agree. But things like subsurface investigation, I don't think they did any. We need to make sure that we say they need to do this. If they find the bedrock, are we going to allow them additional chipping to take out excavation for swimming pools? I would say no. Basements, I would say no. You can build a house without a full basement. Excavate what you need to get your utility lines in, put it on crawl, put it on slab. If you're impacting neighboring properties that much. I think there's a lot more that needs to be in this plan to really make this effective.
Can I ask that, so that absolutely is tonight's discussion. Can I ask that we hold on that part of it just to, I was sort of starting with a debrief of a individual circumstance rather than the future. Can I just ask if anybody else has any questions about Long Drive specifically?
Well, maybe it applies, but to follow up on something that John mentioned, I've a couple of examples that I've read. The noise part of an excavation plan is tied to the particular city's noise ordinance. So by reference, you know, they say see the city's noise ordinance. You have to comply with it. I don't know whether our noise ordinance would be a viable option for setting noise limits. Or it would need to be amended somehow. But you know, throughout this, I'll let you go ahead because maybe something will come up against again later in the discussion. But I think noise is a big issue that we need to work on.
So specific to what you were talking about, one of the things that you said was that, you know, it seemed like they were through Act 250, there were very stringent, complicated requirements put onto the blasting piece. Do you think that because the blasting was made so difficult, that they reverted to this other method, which wound up being like so much longer?
I think it was a contributing factor. You know, I don't. They indicated that that was a component. I don't think it's fair to the residents or us, or even them, to tag everything to one component. But I think that that's a factor. I suspect, this is totally my own speculation, but I suspect that the timing of it didn't help either. That perhaps people would not have been receptive to pre-blast surveys in homes in the spring of 2020. I don't know if that was a factor, but I could imagine that, you know, if I was trying to say, oh, maybe it's only a couple of weeks of chiseling, people might prefer that. But again, speculation. But I think that was a factor on the fee. And
I don't want to be like, I've emphasized 1,500 feet is more than double what is typically done for a surveyed radius for blasting.
The quadruple the area.
Yeah, and in a residential area as it is, that's a large number of structures that need individual meters placed at, calibrated, followed up on, reported. Much larger than it would be if it was just the standard radius.
Yeah, I see 750 feet, similar of the examples I've.
right, we've often seen 500 to 750 is pretty typical.
Anything else on like that part of the background? We didn't get to the memo yet.
Thank you for indulging my
No, that was really helpful.
not overly fun for anybody trip down memory.
Before fun going through.
Yeah, I think
Well, almost everything would be.
It was more fun than.
His recap was more fun than living through it the first time.
Thank you for the intro, Paul. So
Real quick question, do we know if it's done? Are there any lots left, and of those that are left, do they know if they have any ledge on them?
So there are a few lots left. I believe that there are 5-ish lots left. I'm saying ish because one was purchased by a neighbor who's expressed that they may never build on it.
They're not.
It appears that one side of Long Drive has more likelihood of ledge than the other side. One side has had none show up so far, the Butler Farm side.
Yeah.
The other side appears to have some. We have remained in communication with them, and I think that they are very aware of where the city, how the city feels about this going forward. But yes,
Okay.
there's probably a couple of house sites that have prominent ledge around them.
Thank you.
So I don't have much to add on top of that, but I'll just summarize roughly how we went about our research and recommendations. So reading off of our project charge, this was to examine whether, and if so, how it is necessary, feasible, in the best interest of meeting city plan's goal to further refine these new regulations. Just to background everybody in that, those new regulations require a bedrock removal and processing plan for projects that are in the permitting stage. This is now part of the approval process, like zoning permit, subdivision, site plan, whatever. If there is a strong likelihood of reasonable likelihood that there will be significant amounts of bedrock or ledge that is going to be removed as part of that project. And if any kind of blasting at all is going to be done during that project. This can be triggered at the review stage. It can also be triggered along the time of construction. If the bedrock is found to be significant enough that it's going to be an extended and major part of the construction. And you can use the word major, sort of synonymous with the being larger than or longer than the 40 hours de minimis exception. If there is some smaller amount of bedrock that needs to be removed via hydraulic hammering, then the project, whatever level permitted at, can get 40 hours to remove incidental amounts of material via those methods. The DRB or the administrative officer, depending on what type of application we're talking about or where in the city, would be the body to review and approve this application. So we did some research into three buckets of research, let's say. We looked at other communities and we talked to industry professionals and experts and other regulators to talk about best practices and what is currently being done elsewhere. We also looked at the application and sort of the theory of numerical or quantifiable limits for noise emissions from construction activities, specifically bedrock removal. And then we also looked at enforcement feasibility and cost impacts. We focused mostly on the first two. So the result of our research, a lot of what we learned, these things also, I just want to be clear, these three buckets kind of weave in and out of one another. These topics are all kind of mixed up. And so we try to keep, that was the approach that we took. The subject is fairly broad and connected though. But I'll just go through those basically in order. Spoke to a number of our neighbors, talked to other city staff and regulators, and talked to them about what they had done in similar projects. There are none of our neighbors that have any kind of specific numerical limits on construction noise. So we have Burlington does apply some extra standards of review for how blasting needs to be surveyed and communicated to the general public. Essex Junction apparently has some amount of monitoring of their fairgrounds, but not of construction. Other towns may have noise ordinances, but they either specifically exempt construction noise, or in practice, construction noise has not been a regulated activity under those noise ordinances. And that's just not really speaking to intent. That's just based on what we've spoken to with other officials. They said, this is not something that we have used. That's not a subject that we have used or been called to use our noise ordinance to regulate. We did look into find an example of a town in Massachusetts, Quincy, Massachusetts, a little south of Boston, that has an ordinance that does limit construction noise, uses decibels as the metric for that. That is done via a process called a noise mitigation plan, which applicants can apply for if it is likely that they're going to exceed a certain decibel threshold. And then a team of building inspectors is the one to enforce that with monitoring equipment. They also keep up, they also monitor the law itself and the application of that law via a special standing committee that they have that includes industry professionals, elected officials, other policymakers, and people from the construction industry. South Portland, Maine limits nighttime construction. That's more like a performance standard or a noise ordinance. They do allow for some amount of nighttime activity. It's mostly, reading through it, is mostly about maintenance on equipment. So they do use decibels to set a cap on what nighttime equipment or what nighttime construction can rise to in terms of decibels, but during the daytime, so 7 to 9, they allow they lift that cap on decibels. I'm citing examples from New England because generally speaking, New England states have pretty similar state municipal government structures to Vermont. And so while we wanted to cast as wide a net as possible, so that we could get good information on this. Giving a little bit of weight to the examples we found in New England, just because it's a little bit different than, California or Minnesota or Texas, which are all home rule states. Different relationship of the municipal government to general regulatory law, but also state law. And so New England examples tend to be more useful and more informative for the purposes of discussing regulation. We also had some pretty lengthy conversations with experts and practitioners in the construction industry and within the blasting industry and excavation industries. And I won't go into all of the details in that you can read those in the memo. But essentially, what we learned is sort of two major sort of takeaways were that blasting is already very regulated from a federal, state, and here now local level. And it's also limited by its own industry best practices. So some of those are developed in conversation with state regulators. But some of them are also driven by insurance and liability needs. It's a potentially kind of dangerous activity, and so when you're using explosive charges, and so the industry and its practitioners tend to take a pretty conservative approach to their own activities, and they do a lot of monitoring. They do a lot of sort of internal reporting. They carry with them, licenses and insurance that is specific to the activity that they're doing. A little bit more involved than your typical sort of like general liability insurance that a contractor might have. But that adds up to is that basically, it's an industry that is already very well equipped to report out and to enter into a conversation with the municipality that it may have concerns about certain blasting activity, but the blasting activity itself is largely quite safe and is increasingly being used in even more dense areas without incident. We just anecdotally, we talked to some people in Burlington, some of the regulators there who said that when they were one of the blasting activity that jumped to mind for them the most was the demolition and rebuild of the Burlington High School, which required a decent amount of blasting over a few months. And they said that due to the proactive outreach that the blasting specialists did there, they had some constituents who had initially called up the city and said, I'm really worried about this. Like, hope you guys are monitoring this and are really holding their feet to the fire. Had a number of those people be surprised later on to hear that the blasts that they were originally concerned about had already occurred. And so between sort of like small, controlled activity and also like a proactive outreach strategy, a lot of the concerns and the disruption that blasting could potentially cause were largely mitigated. And it's also just important to keep, one of the things that we also heard from that industry and is that, they would much prefer to blast if they can, because it's so much quicker and is much easier to control than other ways of removing bedrock and other like hard subsurface materials. So those other ways of removing hard subsurface materials, we've heard a little bit about them and some of the problems that they can cause. We looked into those as well and talked to some of these same people. Blasting, and we'll call it, by the way, hydraulic hammering. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about some kind of drill or hammer. It drives a bit against the material that is being removed. It's usually mounted on some kind of vehicle, like a skid steer or a backhoe or other kind of construction equipment. This is often done in combination with blasting, but it can also be applied on its own. And this is an activity that really is used pretty widely in a variety of different construction and excavation and demolition scenarios. And it's really, to hear the industry folks talk about it is really, they really seem to consider it as just one more tool in their toolbox that they rely on when necessary, but won't necessarily go to if there's something else that works better. Could be blasting, could be some other way of excavating, could be avoiding it. They can, for when it comes to removing bedrock, though, keeping things focused on bedrock and ledge, when hydraulic hammering is being used, it's typically to remove a wider and shallower area, or to shape something, or to excavate around a sensitive area. For instance, maybe there's a building that they're seeking to preserve, and they need to do some rock removal around the area. That's when the hydraulic hammering is a go-to method of construction. It's also pretty common for urban areas because it's one of the most efficient ways to break up concrete and asphalt, which is typically something that needs to be done in like an infill or redevelopment. A lot of infrastructure work. A lot of utilities lines use concrete lined trenches, and so when those are getting built or rebuilt, hydraulic hammering is often used.
Just to interject briefly, it was across the street, the buildings that are just got occupied and one is under construction. They had a surprise discovery of some bedrock there, and they did look into both blasting and hydraulic hammering, and two things that you described came up specifically. One was they had certain limitations. There were some existing gas lines that they were not permitted to blast near, so they had to hammer in some areas. And then your example of the shallow was exactly the circumstance there. So they had about 2 feet worth that they needed to remove. And so they specifically, knowing all of our history, looked into both. And the quote that they got back was that they would need to do 30 days worth of very small blasting that involved each of their own chiseling in order to get the 2 feet, or about 6 days of chisel. And so in that instance, the lesser of those was by far the chiseling in that instance. So just giving a real world example of what happened across the street from us.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
thanks, Paul. These basically these techniques sometimes are fungible, sometimes they are done in concert. And sometimes it's also one other thing that hydraulic hammering can also, when we are talking about using that as sort of the primary way of removing bedrock or ledge or something like that, like a larger deposit of hard material, one way to speed up that process is to use a drill to perforate that rock, which just allows the chisel to remove it in larger chunks. That can be pretty useful and can significantly speed up the process sometimes, is what I'm told. Other times, though, depending on the type of rock and the orientation of the seams, I'm not a geologist, so please take it with a grain of salt, but it's not always useful to do. Although for certain types of material, it can be. And then sort of the third takeaway was that there is a certain sort of inevitable amount of improvisation that the construction and development process demands. Weather, availability of labor, permitting delays, a variety of things can change the timeline in a process. And so having a tool like a hydraulic hammer on hand can, have the availability of that tool might be used across a variety of different scenarios, which is one reason why it's popular. And it's also one reason why it might be used for a variety of different sort of discrete tasks within one larger construction project, like laying a little bit of utility line and then finishing out, shaping like a cellar hole, or maybe demolishing a structure even prior to that. So, try to wrap up quickly here. We did we did some looking into how other municipalities have talked about used sound exposure and decibels to enforce their noise ordinances or limits. I won't go into all of the detail of how decibels work. If you'd like to get more background on that, there is an excellent memo that the city attorney Colin wrote in February of this year. But to the extent that it is used, to the extent that it is enforceable, it's very difficult to enforce in to use decibels as a metric for enforcing a noise ordinance in sort of the outdoor world, given that practically everything environmental influences how the perceived sound, how the sound is perceived and how it's measured. So things like temperature, humidity, wind direction, cloud cover, leaves on trees or not, snow on the ground, snow not on the ground. All these things can have some amount of influence over what a receiving property, what sound is measured at a receiving property. And I've mentioned that because it basically means that for those activities that are right on the edge of a limit, the same activity one day could theoretically be illegal the next day. And that just makes certain regulatory, that makes basing a regulation on a strict sound limit really difficult and requires ongoing constant monitoring and reporting. So not a reason not to do it, but it is just it's one of the factors that has to be considered in using that as a tool for basing a regulation. We also did a little bit of looking into noise complaints and bedrock removal in South Burlington. I think Paul's introduction largely covered that, but we did try to get a little bit of quantitative data on that.
Please don't need to go there.
Okay.
Well, we're here for a reason because there were so many complaints. To see the document saying there haven't been any complaints flies in the face of what Paul just summarized.
Well, we were talking about one particular project when Paul was saying.
And we
So
had
looked
hundreds of complaints over it.
So we looked into other projects as well, and what we found is that other projects haven't generated that amount of complaint. Just wanted to give that as background. So summarizing these, what we learned essentially is that we have been blasting and hydraulic hammering are essential and commonly used tools for modern construction. They'll be continued to be used. That extending the period of time that they are used tends to up the cost of a project, and costs also tend to determine methods. And so a lot of the folks that we talked to in the industry side said that they were probably more influenced by the overall cost of a particular method than than local regulations. They also, anecdotally, they also told me that they were very interested in limiting the amount of complaints, the amount of disruption, the amount of oversight that any particular project that they're working on generated. They're very helpful and willing to speak with us and provided a lot of really, really good information. So that's it for the research. Be happy to take some questions on that. And other than that, I think we can probably just move into some of the recommendations that we drew up. Based on what we learned, and especially based on the difficulty in enforcing a decibel-based noise ordinance, we believe that there are improvements that we can make to the existing language that give the city and the DRB or the administrative officer the discretion to review and enforce a application that is going to be obviously outside the bounds of something that is acceptable. One of the concerns that we heard was that the language as was passed in September created a chance that there would be an application that would be reviewed and found to check all the boxes, say, to make an assertion that it had that the applicant had planned out all of their activities, had listed all the equipment, had submitted any maps or documentation of their claims, and that would be essentially rubber stamped. And so we addressed that by revising the language to make it more of an affirmative for the DRB or for the reviewer. So the draft would read that the body, the city, shall only approve the application after making a determination that. So essentially that they would have to review it with the following in mind. And we took some inspiration from Act 250's language about a reasonable standard to say that, to just reinforce that it's not just that the applicant would be asserting that these four things would be met, but rather that the reviewer, it's incumbent upon the reviewer to find that balance, that assertion is reasonable. And we also made more explicit the fact that that the application could be rejected on the basis of failing to reasonably balance those four values. And we feel that this is a major improvement on the existing language because it provides more of an affirmative opportunity for an application to be rejected, to be rejected based on an unreasonable balance in one direction or another, whether that be length of time or methods used or any other issue that can aspect of a Bedrock removal plan.
Yes, I have.
Was it? We're ready?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Conrad is hand higher than you do.
Oh, don't start with stretching.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I have a sort of fundamental, two of them actually, fundamental question about it. One is that Bedrock removal seems to be very limiting. Because you remove other material, you maybe have to scrape all the topsoil off before you start hammering at the bedrock. So, and you've used removal and excavation many times, and excavation is the word that I've found in all the examples that I've looked at as indicating what we're doing. It's just rock excavation or soil excavation or whatever it may be. So maybe we should think about a little broader title for this body. There are a couple of other suggestions that I came across, which might be helpful. One of them was that no rock excavation permit shall be issued for a property that is located within 750-foot radius of another property that also has a permit, until such time as the first property has finished or its permit has expired, plus 60 days. It means it gives the people who live in the vicinity of 60 days of peace and quiet. I'm not quite sure where that came from, but it might have come from somewhere in Canada for all I know. You've covered maintenance and cleanup operations in, where is it?
I think that's in G, in reviewing conditions of approval. We're talking about like site
Yeah.
remediation.
G, yeah.
Yeah,
And then in section F, we've talked about it, but I think it would be good to add. That they have to present a neighborhood outreach plan.
Right.
To the homes that are nearby. You talked about the fact that that was very useful and helpful in many instances.
yeah, we found that feedback we got was that neighborhood outreach plans are very useful for blasting scenarios. And it's typically something that is
Blasting
is
or
drawn up for blasting, yeah.
hydraulic hammering, doesn't matter.
So I think that is in our, if that is already in ours. It says, required notification of the city and properties in the immediate vicinity of the approved schedule of bedrock
Okay.
removal. So that is a good point, and we do already have that part
Yeah.
in.
Shouldn't it go in F then? Yeah, that's F9, as a submittal requirement.
I think it's in G.
It's one of the four things that would be balanced in
Well,
an application.
Duration hours.
No, it's in G as the board has the authority to impose conditions
Yeah,
to what you're saying. So certainly, knowing that the board has the authority to do it, most folks will prepare a plan. If you'd like to be more explicit and say that the plan needs to be done and then the board can adjust, and certainly that can be a tweak to that.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point. So it's not required in the submission. So that would be good.
To have it required?
Yeah, to have it.
I would agree. I mean,
Yeah.
I think we might as well be upfront and say we want the plan and it needs to include this.
Have you? You say in B2. You can do from 8 AM to 5 PM. But we don't say that it's Monday to Friday. And not on holidays. Somewhere. I don't see it somewhere anywhere, unless I misread it.
I mean, not to be contrarian, does it matter that much if it's weekend or weekday? Cause like, I feel it's more about not trying to disrupt people's sleep and the like, and not everyone's on a Monday through Friday schedule.
No, I
Maybe
don't-
everyone disagrees with me. I'm more careful with the hours. I'm concerned about the days to week personally.
Well, they're not sleeping during the day.
Sorry.
They're not sleeping during.
Well,
the
that's
day.
my point, is 8 to 5 is more about avoiding nighttime hours than business hours. Like, I'm not sure it matters if it's where or not city offices are open during the blasting.
No, yeah, they can blast from 8 to 5.
Yeah, and so do we
Oh.
care if it's Sunday or if it's Monday? I personally wouldn't, but maybe we decide we should do.
Probably, yes, because then the families, their kids are not at school, they're at home, it's family time.
So Act 250 often has conditions specific to blasting that prohibit on Sundays, federal holidays, and sometimes they do it Saturdays as well in their conditions. That's what we've seen. So that's not necessarily all forms, but
Did you experience blasting on weekends?
Blasting wasn't the issue, it was the hammering,
Or
and
the
I
chiseling?
don't think they did any of that on weekends. I could be wrong. It kind of, you heard it even when they weren't doing it after a while.
Well, yeah.
So but I don't believe they did it on weekends. But it was like 4 months the first time, 4 or 5 months it was.
All the examples that I read excluded the weekends and holidays.
You know, I wonder if it is something that like just goes into like the period, you know, the discussion of when it's happening, because if you could do it over like 10 days straight and be totally done and never have to come back, but you went through the weekend. That might be better than like, I don't know, I'm just thinking.
Yeah.
There
Cause that
could
might be a savings.
There could be, it could just be better for the neighbors to say, let's just get it done. We'll know it's during this. Period, you know, I don't know, I guess they just.
Probably come out in the outreach if the neighbors said they'd do it over the weekends.
Yeah, I guess the only question is if it's all like the de minimis and minor ones. If we ban a weekend, that creates situations where if someone were doing construction 7 days a week. And they found just a small rock on Saturday morning, having to halt construction towards Monday, where it could be a little onerous just for since it is de minimis, it's like just spend 4 hours. Chiseling it and it's done. I would work it.
De minimis anyway.
Well, just because this is specific. People talking about section B, right? This is specific about the minimis standards.
This all came about as Paul so eloquently recapped because of a noise issue. And city council sent this along to try and do something about the noise issue. And we seem to be off on a tangent where we're doing this whole plan and nowhere in the plan does it address the noise.
That was my second fundamental question.
It doesn't seem to do what they asked us to do. The recap that you gave in the memo, I would be fine with eliminating blasting from this altogether. It doesn't seem to be a big problem. The drilling that goes along with the blasting, maybe, but the blasting itself doesn't seem to be a real issue. I don't think it's a bad idea for us to have it, but I don't think that it's just kind of getting brought along with this original topic that we don't seem to be addressing. And without putting some sort of limit on it, at least we don't talk about mitigation. Did they do anything to try and mitigate the noise? Did they go out and buy some temporary chain link fencing and put it around the site and put some noise dampening barriers on it to try and do something to keep the noise from getting nothing? And there's nothing in here that says they have to. And that's what I think if we want this to really accomplish anything, we need to set some performance standards and say, you need to tell us how you're going to mitigate. Don't just give us a plan that says this is how much noise we're gonna make. Okay.
Let me, so one thing to start just on the blasting side, just as context. We think it's important that we do regulate the blasting in part because that has historically been only Act 250. Fewer things are gonna be in Act 250 in the future.
Yeah,
So
I
regardless of
absolutely
this
agree with that. I think it's a good idea.
Right.
But I'm not sure that it's generated, it carries along nicely, but we still seem to be missing the driver for this.
And
So,
the second thing I just want to say contextually on this is, the looking back at Long Drive, one of the things that to us was a gap was that the subject of bedrock removal, unfortunately, was not looked at holistically.
Yeah.
And so this tries to say, we want a plan for the removal so there are no loopholes in either direction. So that's what I just wanted to share, that to us, it is important that it be looked at because they're both methods of doing the same thing. And to talk about one without talking about the other gives a loophole to go to a different problem that we may have never faced yet,
Right.
that
And-
we don't want to
And
face.
I'm not arguing that this isn't a good idea to do this.
Yes.
But I don't think it addresses the original driver of what started this.
So
The
it
car's
does-
rolling down the hill, but I think the driver is back at the top.
So it does say in here that demonstration of how the means, methods, and excavation balance the following objectives, limit level of noise, factors considered a noise limitation in long periods and use of sound blocking measures such as blast match, positioning equipment, construction sequencing. So that's all in there.
Right, but almost all that refers to blasting.
No, that is how the means and methods of removal of bedrock.
No, actually, they actually, in those red line, they actually added specifically that the dog to make sure that that's referred to in there. You are correct, there is not a decibel level.
No, there's not a
There's not.
decibel, and the blast mats are for the blasting, positioning the equipment. Oh, my concern is
Fair
that
enough.
we're just asking them to
Right.
document what they were gonna do anyway. And then we're gonna say, yep, that's well documented. And we could still end up with a situation where we've got this horrendous noise.
I see what you're saying, and on the blast mats, you're saying that refers to only
That refers to the
Blast mats,
mat,
as
right, that you
opposed
put
to
over it
mats.
before,
for other purposes.
right, but there's no talking about noise dampening. And those things are possible to do
Yeah.
without it being an excessive cost.
So, why do we have to specifically have a regulation of blasting when we can just take the state and say it applies by reference?
That's part of what we do right in there. A
But-
blasting plan as described in the Vermont blasting plan guidance,
Okay,
but we,
wait, then comes the noise. If the Air Force was able to make a noise, a 65 decibel noise plan around the airport, why can't we have a 65 decibel noise plan? Or maybe it's different, maybe not 65, maybe it's a different level, but DBAs are what we measure as human beings. Why can't we do that? I mean, we've documented a lot of reasons why we can't, or why it's difficult. But I'll repeat the mantra that I used to tell my guys: the degree of difficulty is not going to be the yardstick by which we judge whether we're going to do this project or not. You've got to find a way to do it. It doesn't seem, I mean, it seems difficult, but it doesn't seem out of our reach.
Michael, one thing you just said, this isn't specifically about decibels, but you just said judges whether you do the project or not. And one of the things that I wonder if it should be in here is an avoidance. Like, did the project consider not removing the bedrock as just,
Right.
you know, part of it? I feel like there's some
Well,
situations, and I think
It's
you,
already away.
I think you maybe brought up the point,
No, I
like,
think-
you know, if you've got bedrock, maybe you don't get to put a pool in. Like, you know, like,
Or a
I
walking
don't
basement.
know exactly what the,
It could
Now,
kind
if
of,
Donna was here
Yeah.
tonight, she would say, absolutely, you could use pole construction.
yeah, or why, I mean, we're pinning stuff to bedrock all the time, like, I am a civil engineer, we do this, you uncover the bedrock, you maybe scrape it up a little bit, you like maybe hose it down, you maybe chip away a little bit just to make sure you've got all the loose stuff off, and then you pin something to it.
Yeah, that was,
Or you use a slab,
Mhm.
like, are there,
you-
like, I feel like there could be a part of this,
Mhm.
maybe at the beginning where. You make them describe why they need to remove it in the first place, cause it feels like.
or
There's
maybe,
an, there's an awful lot of cases where, like, why can't you just have a house on a slab? Or, I don't know, maybe there's a reason in certain circumstances why you actually can't do that, but. I guess in my opinion, it feels like if we're having them go through all this, we should try to get them to just consider.
We'll have to avoid it.
Like, you know, with wetlands permitting and stuff, there's always like an avoidance, you have to talk about how you considered avoiding first. And, I mean, I'm not saying we should not let people remove bedrock, cause. I do know there are times when it makes a lot of sense, and you really wanna be able to do it, you wanna be nimble, and. You know, that's why I think this de minimis part should stay in there, if we're partway through a. Utility project and you get a little piece of bedrock in the way of your sewer pipe, you wanna be able to like get it out of the way, but.
I guess the question, well, would it make more sense to kind of, I do like that idea, would it make more sense to sort of have that as sort of like an initial check? Or would it be more make sense to say like in section, F8, there's limit duration, limit on noise, limit impact, limit cost, could you say limit volume of removal? So sort of it's one of the many things we're balancing, so like, oh, maybe we're having more volume here, but we're putting all these advanced mitigation techniques to try to make it like with the, yeah, is it like a separate thing, or is it one of these many limiting factors in section 8? Which again, if we don't like how they're complying with section 8, we already are saying we can deny the permit if we don't like how we're complying with section 8, the balance is in 8, or is it a high level thing?
So. The four, in 8, the four, qualities that are being balanced are, to some degree, at least limited built environment, level, noise duration, are all to some degree proxies for volume. So yes, something like that could be added. But all of those have some amount of, bearing on on volume and vice versa. So, yeah, it could be added. I'm not sure if that would
I
necessarily.
guess, yeah, was saying, like, is there a way they have? I mean, I think that the word we keep getting at is,
Can we avoid it?
yeah, can they avoid it? Like, yeah, can they just
So-
build on something? But we're saying how the design
Yeah.
of the structure is designed such to reduce.
Using the example from across the street, because I think that sort of tells this idea sort of on both sides of it.
Mhm.
I mentioned the 2 feet. They did the pinning to bedrock as one of their strategies. So originally they were gonna have to go down, their plan was to go down X number of feet, and they were able to reduce that by about 4 feet by pinning to bedrock rather than removing it.
Mhm.
I think that's the good example of what you're talking about. The consequence that in this instance probably would not have been of benefit to the city is if the limitations had said you can't put an underground parking garage anymore, which would have dramatically changed the whole project and probably made it a lot fewer housing units being built or a lot more surface parking. And so figuring out what's the balance of those 2 things in that instance, I think they came up with a pretty good balance to find a way that didn't have to remove bedrock, but also didn't have to have an unintended consequence to the city.
Yeah.
Um,
Also, yeah, bedrock also is not a natural resource in the same way that a wetland is or trees are. When we're talking about avoiding removing bedrock, we're not talking about doing that for the sake of the bedrock. We're talking about doing it for the sake of reducing the noise generated by
I
it.
was talking about limiting the volume to avoid impacting the resource of bedrock. I was talking about limiting the noise by potentially just not removing it.
So I realize.
So if they could blast a really big hole in a short amount of time, that's totally, that seems way better than chipping away for months on
Sure,
end.
yes.
So that's where I think we wanna try somehow hone in on, like.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not a decibel
The
level,
impact
because
matters.
like 2 days of something loud might be way better than 4 months of like
We can't have,
slightly less loud, but like really annoying.
we have that 8A, like 8A does say that about the
Yeah.
duration.
Right, and I don't wanna lose that. So,
Yeah, agreed.
like, I think that's where a decibel level feels uncomfortable to me, like if we could. Have some way of saying if it's really only a week, but it's louder. And,
Still
it
have to
avoids
say-
a whole summer of it.
Right, there's gotta be some proxy for impact.
Right, and I don't know how we use decibels for that, so that's the. I just don't. know.
Yes, and I really do, I think a lot of it depends on who the receiving properties are. Like I said, can you imagine if Long Drive was right next to one of the elementary schools? How would you hold class? You couldn't. You couldn't hear yourself inside the house with the windows closed. We were locked in our houses for the whole summer, and I knew people that had been, stay at home, you had home businesses that had to go someplace else. Some people that just took hotel rooms to get away from the noise. So even 40 hours of that is quite onerous. We may decide that that's acceptable, but they could get louder too. That's what scares me. They could be closer, they could be louder. Where they were working on Long Drive was not right in my backyard. They could have been even closer. I can't imagine what the noise would have been. So that's why I'm thinking there needs to be some sort of limits. I think, like I said, things like engineering around it in the first place. But the impact matters. And maybe because we haven't had that bad an experience with it, and I have personally, blasting seems to be a much less impactful solution. You have one loud noise. You know, maybe 2 or 3 blasts a day. Because they're only allowed to do a certain number as part of the Act 250 blasting plan, because they were blasting around our house, over the summer. I never heard a thing.
One of the things that we think that this regulation does and will do by forcing folks to have a plan much earlier in the process is it will steer more folks towards blasting. Because the hydraulic jackhammering is a thing you can do by renting a truck and showing up that day. The blasting takes preparation. Everything else being equal, if you are required to have a plan months in advance, that is already forcing you to have thought about the subject. So I'm not saying it, is 100% going to declare, but it is definitely steering people in a direction of you must have a plan, so do it the right way.
Here's an idea for you. Because I don't see anywhere in here where it says who writes the plan. Can we specify that it's gotta be sealed? That we need an engineer to stamp the plan, present it at the DRB?
Is an engineer required to stamp a blasting plan?
But it wouldn't be for hammering.
Well, yeah, so that's a question, 'cause yeah, if it's
I
That's
feel
why I
like
think-
I'm qualified as a licensed civil engineer to stamp a hydraulic hammering plan really easily. Like I could do that tomorrow.
Should-
I do it all the time actually, but like I can't stamp a Eston.
well, some PE is stamping that,
So
you probably.
Somebody does.
We can take a look at that. What we typically use is a qualified professional is the word that we use in our regulations. Because it gives the board the ability to, let's say we're talking about landscaping. Landscape architects can do it, others can potentially do it. It gives, it gives if you say qualified professional, it gives the board the ability to
Decide qualification.
determine qualifications, because there might be some degree in mineral extraction that is not.
Because my concern is, I think the larger developers are gonna have a larger staff, they're gonna have more experience with these things, they're gonna have a much better plan to begin with. That's not where we got into trouble. We got into trouble with a smaller builder that was kind of doing things by a shoestring. And the plan they would have generated would have been on the back of a napkin, and it would have been 5 minutes. And here it is.
And keep in mind, the board always has the authority to invoke an independent technical review, which they did at Park Road. Even when it was a qualified firm that did it, they invoked a technical review by an entirely third party and said, you know what, we're not experts in this. We want to have somebody who doesn't have a stake in this evaluate. So that is a tool that absolutely can, should be used.
So what's the language that would allow or would encourage the builder to not do blasting or chiseling or any of it? That they would build something that doesn't have a basement, for example? So, I mean, that's one of the things that would avoid the noise, correct?
I mean, still a foundation,
Pardon me?
they'll reduce the noise, not having a basement, you're still probably gonna need.
Well, yeah.
Yeah,
construction
reduce the
is noisy,
scope.
but
Right.
it would reduce it to a great extent. So what is the language where you don't say we don't really want blasting because it's so noisy, and if we can't have blasting, then you can't have walkout basements on Bedrock. But we want to encourage a developer to consider, there's a lot of bedrock here, so maybe my plan ought to not require some huge amount of blasting, even if it's just blast one big hole and it's done with. Is that what we're
You could
trying
put
to
a
say?
fifth item in there, basically to limit extent. Has the plan been reviewed to reduce the amount of bedrock removal that's required to the extent necessary?
Yeah.
And will this have a positive impact on noise impact and these other things? Because if they can say, well, we're doing it, but it's not, we don't expect any impacts. That's what we're blasting anyway, so instead of blasting 3 feet, we're blasting 6 feet, there's no difference. But if it's a matter of, oh, we're gonna hammer for a week, or oh, we're gonna hammer for 4 months.
I have to, just back on the whole thing we're talking about, like blasting versus hammering, it sounds like there's particularly people who have brought the situation that the issue we have had has been limited to hydraulic hammering. So this is for in the state of Vermont for state highways, the agency of transportation basically a few years back said we care about safety, and in general roundabouts are the safest form of intersection in most cases that we're dealing with in the state of Vermont. I can chat with everyone after why that's the case, but regardless, essentially the state, and we have an interest in trying to install roundabouts where we can. Now, whenever you do an intersection project on a state highway in Vermont, you are required to consider a roundabout. And if you put something in that isn't a roundabout, you have to explain why you're not putting a roundabout in. And it can be pretty brief a lot of times. It would just feel like it don't fit. You know what I mean? Like but you need to have at least considered it. And if coming in here, would it be interesting to say, like, well, yeah, sure, like de minimis stuff, like you're going to have to do every now and again some hydraulic drilling. But if you have a non-de minimis, like multi-week long hydraulic drilling, can you at least require them to say, why aren't you just doing blasting? Because we as a city feel that's going to be less disruptive, and that will at least make them forced to at least look into blasting. I mean, we're sort of already implying that we've talked about a little bit, putting more of a point on it, saying like we prefer blasting as a city, do something to demonstrate. We don't need to get into details of it, but then the DRB can say, your explanation of why you've chosen, it doesn't make sense why you choose drilling it here. Could you please, like, we're essentially saying a stated preference for blasting, not requirement, not require blasting, but a preference for blasting when it is a large project, and is on them to say why not, and then the DRB can argue with them if they don't like their explanation.
That feels a little similar, and maybe just picking up that 8B, like the 8B, I think is maybe trying to get at what you're saying.
Well, I will make
but
explicit, like,
it's not
we prefer blasting. We would be saying that, yeah, that's a decision, that's definitely the decision we're making, but it's more explicitly for this alternative.
So maybe that could be like beefed up.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of the roundabout, before we had that, we had this whole evaluation. We always do evaluation matrices, and there's all these various factors, and we consider a thing, and that sort of thing specifically. But this roundabout thing is a particular preference of ours, and I'm suggesting doing something.
Yeah,
It's a value judgment.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think that that's something that the industry, as a shared value with the industry, based on what I've heard. Most of the contractors I talked to said, like, unprompted, we would much rather blast if we ever get the chance. Obviously, the people who are, running the blasting companies would rather do that as well. That's their wheelhouse. But even the GCs and the sort of just project engineers, and sort of like back of the house guys in the development corporations I spoke to said, yeah, I mean, blasting is just, it's our preference for a variety of reasons. And, frankly, the disruption of using other methods to excavate is a big one of those reasons. Like, they would much rather have a project go smoothly without requiring much oversight by the city, or having to do a bunch of outreach to or have to frankly field complaints from neighbors. Like, they would much rather do that. And financially speaking, for a large enough project, blasting is almost always going to be the cheaper thing. And at the end of the day, they're thinking about profit and cost. So they're already incentivized to do that. We could make it a little bit more explicit that that's a value from the city's perspective as well.
And
We can look
especially-
into that, yeah.
And I guess the point is, for the big developers, everyone should be looking at this anyways, the big developers probably already doing it, for someone that's in a little over their head and just, I don't want to deal with blasting. Yes, it sounds like that may have been a contributing factor in the long drive.
Yeah.
And maybe if they've been forced to say, why can't you just don't blast up front, maybe they would have decided differently. If they're forced looking, they're forced looking.
Of what both of you are saying, like the act of making this plan be created by someone like a qualified blaster. You know, you're not gonna get the fly by the seat of their pants, just gonna go hammer at it, because they have to go through this whole planning process, so.
But we should also try and incentivize. Pole construction, no basement.
Like the avoidance.
Hmm?
Yeah, avoiding
Yeah.
removing. Duncan, have I been ignoring you? Are you? Yeah, good.
Was just
What I
watching the
think,
comedy show.
One of the, like, get back to, somebody mentioned earlier is, who's it? Because somebody mentioned earlier that we needed to have something included. Don't come back to me.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
So I wrote down specifically mentioning noise dampening, not just the blast mix.
Yeah, noise mitigation.
Noise mitigation.
There are ways to do it.
Somehow having some language in under 8, like another bullet that would be about kind of avoidance methods considered to limit volume
So you'd add an
or
E,
noise. Yes, so
so it'd be 5 things?
so there'd be an E in there, the avoidance thing. Somehow, somewhere including that the plan should specifically be prepared by a qualified professional. So we're probably gonna get that more advanced plan. And if it works, say that we have the preference towards blasting. To limit duration.
And
Those were the 4 things I wrote down so far.
You also talked about outreach plan.
The notifications?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
As
the
of,
notifications.
Was,
So the notifications would be moved up to. Those
What-
are moved. So,
one other thing that I would suggest, probably talk to Colin about is. If necessary to improve the city's case, if it ever comes to it, putting something in saying that. In the event the removal generates excessive noise. The city reserves the right to act under the nuisance ordinance. If everything goes by and it's still, you've got a couple hundred people turning up at the city council meeting, I don't think you want to block your ability. To say, okay, something went wrong in this process and we've got an unacceptable impact. And at least take them to court that way. And that may get them to do something.
Would it, maybe on that note, could you sort of have something like? If it's considered, well, we say like, or not just defined, but also like required to put mitigation, like, required to put in basic sound maps or something like that, if it's becoming an issue, like. I don't know if that's legally enforceable or not, but.
I would think at that point that the contractor would do what they could to try and get the plan to something acceptable.
Yeah,
But I'm just, if we think that this may make it very difficult for the city to bring a case under the nuisance ordinance. But I'm just wondering if there's some language that can be put in to say, in the event that. You know, an approved plan generates noise that's a public nuisance. The city.
or it
retains
is
the right.
greater than anticipated in the, like.
If the commission would like us to explore that with city attorney, we're happy to do it. I suspect that they might, it might have to be words like, you know, excessive and unusual, something that is clearly above what anybody should have anticipated based on a full plan. Like they decided to, you know, not oil the machine.
I mean, it's interesting, if their plan
like-
didn't work as they advertised it would, you need to fix your own plan. If you said it would be fine and it isn't fine, you need to review your plan. It's sort of.
Yeah.
Right, so Duncan's, wait a minute.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, you guys are having a great conversation. I think it's going really well. I would agree with what John said. The whole reason front of us was noise. Really have issue, but I think you guys are right. The only thing I might is, I think somebody mentioned it, is having something there about is the best necessary. Does the house really need a basement? It actually, it's cheaper not to have that. So I don't know if it's wording compared to that extent. But I think we should have some better metrics for noise mitigation too.
So the plan would have to identify potentially ways to mitigate the noise.
And they should get creative and let them come up with something. They
Right.
know they have to.
And have it connected to a metric, or just, we know it's gonna be noisy.
I personally would still like to see some maximum decibel level at the receiving properties, but I think there is a point where too much is too much.
Mhm.
And the worst case, if they can't do it, then they shouldn't do it. I am okay with the city losing 1 in 1,000 developments if it's gonna be a nightmare for a bunch of residents for months and months and months. There's a trade-off there. The housing unit or two that you get for disturbing thousands of people for an entire summer, I don't think is equivalent. So if the developer can do it without doing that, fantastic, go ahead and build. But I think there are points where you say no. And that's where it gets to like things with the basement. It's like, you didn't need the basement. That would have saved us a couple months.
I hear that. I will say that my worry is at the complete opposite end of the spectrum where the rule that gets written has to apply fairly uniformly, and the UMall comes in with a 14-story building and says to do that in the back corner, we have to create the foundation for it, and we have to apply that same rule in that circumstance and say, sorry, you can't build. That's my worry without having the knowledge of what the implications would be.
Yes, but I think if you have somebody that comes in with a project of that scope, they're going to know how to do it. And I think they can they do things like I said, in the middle of cities, they'll build skyscrapers.
Right. But that might be lapped for portions of it.
Depends for how long. Somehow I don't think in New York you've got development going on where people can't hear themselves think in their own apartments for months on end. Yeah, talking over and above the.
It did.
Really, if it happens again, I'll invite everybody over to sit in my kitchen with the windows closed, and you have to yell to be heard because the noise is so bad from the hair.
So it does seem that, if I may characterize a little bit, that it's the combination of duration and maximum sound level that's really the issue. So
134 decibel boom.
Yeah, right. Which is why blasting is
2 or 3 times a day or whatever the maximum it is.
Yeah. I mean, so it's really that. So yeah, which explains why blasting seems to be tolerated by most folks.
And to put it in perspective,
Yeah.
They're building those houses back there. So we've got saws and we've got hammers and we got nail guns and that's all fine. Nobody's complaining about that. It's not a big deal. The leaf blowers are noisier than any of that stuff is. It's not, it's a whole different thing. I worked in oil refineries and I was on units that were quieter than that.
Yeah. So I guess, I would say that I think that the changes that we're suggesting, I think, give the city more ability to take enforcement action and to preemptively review a plan for the purposes of making sure that its duration is not excessive and unreasonable. And from what I'm hearing, that the suggestions and that I've heard tonight, I think add extra ability, like more criteria and sort of finer grained scrutiny to that ability. So if you combine these suggestions, that we've made with the suggestions that we've had tonight. I think we're getting a lot closer to a pretty broad but also nuanced tool that the city can apply to limit that like combination of duration and expand like instantaneous noise.
Along those lines, kind of a either or with the issue with the nuisance, is it worthwhile putting language in that allows planning and zoning department to come back and reopen a plan in the event that they have excessive complaints, that the noise is over and above normal and anticipated, some sort of language that allows you to come in and say, wait a minute, something's not working the way it was supposed to.
So the mechanism that exists is to essentially issue a notice of violation that you are violating the conditions of your approval. The way to cure it is to either stop doing it or come in with a new plan.
Okay, but
We don't really have the authority to claw things back.
that's what I'm saying though. If they come in with the information we've asked for, they're not gonna be able to project what the decibel level is gonna be. They're gonna tell you everything they're gonna do and they're gonna try and mitigate it and all this. And then they get in and they do exactly what they said in their plan. And it's 100 decibels at the property line. And you've got the nursing home screaming about it. Maybe we need to think, is there some way to put the language in there that if the performance of the plan does not yield a noise level that is reasonable, that the plan needs to be reconsidered? Because otherwise they got a plan and too bad, and they're following the letter of the law, and you still have a huge problem. So I'm just wondering whether there's a way to put something in there.
With the nuisance ordinance, the city reserves the right to, if it's excessive.
Yes.
And
What I'm suggesting is giving your office the ability to come back in and say, okay, let's take another look at this plan. Is there something else we can do? We gotta do something here.
Yeah,
Is that
I mean,
better?
these things work together, right? So
Yes.
I think we're happy to explore both of those. I think the threat of the nuisance one would likely kick somebody back to do this work, right? So
Yes.
it's
That's why I said either or.
I mean, I guess one thing, just to bring it back a little bit. Maybe others disagree on this. It seems that even as written, and we're adding more to it, which I'm very happy we are, but if this project hypothetically had gone through this ordinance and had gone through here, I mean, simply put, limit duration. Even then, like the long drive to place, like, yeah, so we're just going to spend a couple minutes blasting at like 12 different sites over the course of 2 years. Like that is clearly not limiting duration. Like even as is, it seems like it feels like the long drive you couldn't justify that plan purely due to 8A alone at the moment. I mean, you would just blown up the whole thing over the course of like a few weeks or something with a ton of plastic, basically. I don't know, maybe I will disagree with that, but like.
I guess that's kind of why I've pushed back a little bit on the decibel level, because it feels like if that plan came in, maybe they thought they were gonna do 3 weeks. They did the 3 weeks and then it turned into 2 summers. There would have been a mechanism in place to like not let it just continue to go on and on, because they would have reached their allowed duration. They would have done their 3 weeks and have not been done, and then they would have had to come back to get a new plan, so. It feels like that situation has at least oversight and like durations and limits and.
Provided we have some kind of language that says like, if it's way above what you're expecting. Because in this case, if that was 3 months, it tend to be, if that was gonna be 3 weeks, it's trying to be 2 years. We need a mechanism to make.
Well, so the plan would have
if they
duration.
said it was gonna be
Yeah.
3 weeks and it wound up being more than 3 weeks, that's a violation.
Yeah, the plan would have expired.
So it's not, that's
Fair.
not the unexpected, that's just violating the plan.
Fair.
I think what the thing that maybe, John, what I heard from what you were saying was, it's within the 3 weeks. Something was way off the rails from whatever he was expecting within the approval.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I'm saying, like, if they go into a plan saying this is gonna take a year and a half. We just would not approve that and said we're gonna need a year and a half straight blast of shipping.
And that's where
I would hope.
Right, well, and that's where the added language of a reasonable balance has come in, and that's, you know, that it sounds like a soft word, but it is a word that has been through the legal machinations.
So are
The
you,
permits have a defined term.
What?
They
Permits?
expire at some point.
They do.
So once, once they've expired and the job's not done,
Well,
Well-
it also depends on the scale of the project. So O'Brien Eastview, in their approval, they have a pretty, you know, extensive blasting section, and they can blast for a certain period of time. And then there has to be a gap of, you know, an entire season before they can do another phase of it. It's an extensive thing because they're doing years and years worth of work, but the work happens in intentional groupings. So that it's not forever and just sort of like, oh, we're gonna do one section of sidewalk this year.
well, presumably, I mean, it's just like any development. Don't they come back with, oh, we really thought we wanted to build 300 units, but things have changed and they're not gonna be single family, they're gonna be duplexes now, and it's actually,
Right.
you know, 500, and they get a new, it's a new plan, they get a new permit. So it seems to me in this blasting thing, if it really goes haywire, they really thought they could do it in 3 weeks. And it isn't, they would have to come back with another plan.
Yeah.
So this is how we're going to manage this, so we can complete
And
the
get
rest of the homes or
on the
whatever.
DRB schedule and wait,
Well,
present, and, yeah, I would say it wouldn't be easy.
No, but it also wouldn't be allowed to just dribble on. for
Right.
months on end, like,
Because there's a disincentive for them to allow that to happen.
I mean-
So,
would this require that if they were excessive and it was not what they had intended or anticipated, and, you know, neighbors were really at arms, that you could force them to come back with Plan B, because Plan A didn't make it?
Right, so if they're exceeding the 40 hours, that's the de minimis, or if they're not adhering to the plan, then that is a violation. And there's, you know, 2 basic ways to cure a violation: stop doing it or apply for a different plan. And under,
stop and apply.
well, you could just stop. And importantly, you know, not to go too deep into the weeds here, Vermont has a long-standing court case, and Kelsey, just slap me if I'm saying the wrong thing here. Stowe Club Highlands is an important court case where you can't just come back with the same thing and ask for a different condition. So you can't just say, I'm not changing anything except I want to have more leniency in a previously determined condition. Something has to change. A plan has to change. The law has to change. Something substantive you can't just retest a condition that was already applied to you. Does that make sense? So you'd have to come back with a different plan, not just a request for more.
more generous for them.
As far as neighbor impact and input goes as well, this essentially creates a new forum, a previously unavailable forum for that kind of input. And it puts it up front so that all these plans are public and subject to public scrutiny and comment. So that's something that neighbors are going to be able to look at ahead of time, and it actually provides more opportunity for that kind of review and comment than we've had in the past, because in the past it's been after the project has already been approved.
Which is an excellent point. Could we put a noticing requirement in there? If they have to notice a certain radius around before the DRB hearing?
Anything that's going in the DRB is already noticed.
But that's a butters over.
For adjacent properties and
So
all.
asking for
Yeah,
more
but
than a
the
butters.
radius.
Is it the same notice that Act 250? That you get a letter.
So
I mean.
Act
things flipped
250
to us, we
and
get a
locally
letter.
are the same rule, which is all abutters plus anything goes to the DRB has to get published in the newspaper. If it's certain types of application posted in advance. I'd be wary of changing that. Big projects involve master plans now. Master plans already have additional notice requirements. I think it becomes very tricky to get that right.
What do you mean, get it right? So that
Well-
you really notify everyone who's supposed to be notified?
Well, so under state law, the burden of doing it correctly is the applicant's. It's not the city's responsibility. And so if a neighbor is not appropriately notified, then they can take legal action against the developer. If we choose to go higher, that becomes our burden of responsibility to make sure that the applicant gave us the right addresses. How do you draw that line? Is it as the crow flies?
Radius.
It's opening radius from
Where?
the center, radius from the outside. It opens a big can of worms that might not succeed in the level of predictability that you're hoping it's gonna do.
Well, we've had good discussion. Do we have any comments or questions from the audience? In the room or joining us online?
Not radius.
What?
I'm waiting for them.
I didn't hear anything, so you.
No, I was gonna respond to Paul's, the radius was a bad idea, but certainly a buffer from the property line of the development. Yeah.
It's
Within,
quite difficult to draw those two, cause
It's
like,
not-
does it have a rounded corner or does it have a straight corner? Or how do you?
How big's
It's-
the lot?
it- Right, it's for being on the other side. I know it's complicated, but it's bad because people don't know these things. So it'll get passed, it'll get approved, and the first thing somebody's gonna know is when the noise hits, but that's you, and then they'll all come screaming, you never told us. I was in the paper, I didn't look at the paper.
Right.
No.
Any other comments or questions at this point? I kind of let us go a little long here. There's a few other things on the agenda.
So just to sum up, we got a lot of great feedback. Let us chew on this. We'll come back to you. It won't be at your next meeting, but we'll plan to come back to you in January with some updated ideas on this.
Thank you. There's a lot in here. So let's move on to the UPWP. This is the grants through the Regional Planning Commission.
So next meeting, you're gonna get our formal list of what our recommendations are. Right now, we have some buckets that we wanted to go over a little bit with you and get your feedback on. And I just need to.
Did you get sent the buckets? No. Okay.
They have apologized.
The updated, a combination of your off meeting schedule and then new guidelines for when council needs things in advance.
we did.
Sometimes I miss things, so. I
Could you just
didn't
tell
look
us the buckets?
Okay.
Great.
So buckets that we're looking at are, last year you had applied for municipal planning grant, that was not successful on doing center, like planning for a center along Sheldon Road or downtown area. We would like, tentatively, we're looking to apply for that through the transportation fund here. Years ago, the city center form-based code was funded by that same tool, so we think that that's something that we can run up the flagpole with them and see if it would pass muster. It has to get regional planning approval and also the federal highway person's approval and. But it is about creating, downtown, which hopefully is widely supported.
So this is applying for federal transportation funds.
Through the reach, right, that's
Through the
the
RPC.
RPC, yeah. We are looking at the next priority projects on bicycle pedestrian, the scoping of those as identified in the active transportation plan. So what's next on the list? Our capital planning person is out this week, so and last week, so we're going to connect with her before the exact list. But that's implementing the active transportation plan, improving the mobility and access. And Kelsey, can you remind me the words? I wrote down mobility and access as a theme in here. That was
Missing sidewalks?
missing sidewalks, looking at multimodal transportation options. Potentially, working with Green Mountain Transit, which we're already doing. But seeking grant funding to adjust their routing based on where our changing population areas are, not just locally, but in Winooski and Shelburne and Williston. We've had these conversations already started. That's really,
Right.
I
And I
think-
think some of it was one or two ideas were also related to public education about pedestrian and bike safety and rights of way and
Yeah.
some of those other things of in the not specifically, but in the general vein of Project Zero, you know, and moving towards the goal of having no pedestrian or cyclist fatalities or casualties or injuries. I believe injuries is included, but one part of it is part of it is infrastructure, but another part of it is education and outreach. And so I think that was another thing that was noted, not specifically pursuing Project Zero, but
right, some is about safety, some of it is anecdotally. UVM did a really good job of informing their new tenants here of the availability of the bus, and from day one, there's been high ridership there. So can we do some analysis of, can targeted education really maybe actually move the needle on some of these things if you get people right when they're moving into areas? And then the last two are data collection, which we always do, of traffic counts and things like that. And
including bike.
yeah. And then next brownfields project. So we kicked off a project a couple weeks ago with property owners along San Remo Drive to potentially doing a multi-site brownfields analysis, and also sort of a meet greet for each other because they don't all know each other, and it had a really positive reception. So we're looking, where can we potentially do the same thing on parts of Williston Road to help them move things along. So those are our themes. We'll come back to you with specific ones at your next meeting.
Do you, you might not like this one.
No, so part of why we're here tonight is to hear
No,
your
so
thoughts that aren't
What
on
I
that.
was gonna say is, I actually don't remember all the current UPWP projects that we might have going on and what their status
It's
is.
been 12 months. You don't remember every single thing?
I don't, so I guess I was wondering if we could have like a tiny mini update, even if it's just one sentence
So-
on like kind of the existing projects.
In prior years, we did a little like, here's where we're at with the current ones.
Yeah.
I'm happy to do
I
that
think that would be
in
really
your memo
helpful,
for next
just
week.
to put it in context.
Yeah. Yeah, they take some time, some of these, so, yeah, absolutely. Is there any big things that have been burning in your minds that are sort of, generally, this is mostly geared toward transportation, that you'd like us to be exploring?
I guess my other thing, were there some that we had from last year that didn't get funded other than that Shelburne Road Center? Cause sometimes we've done some thinking and then we thought we said we wanted to do it and then it kind of didn't get funded and then it gets lost. Like, I guess I just wonder if we could look back at last year's list and make sure there wasn't
So
something.
each of the ones that we asked for last year did get funded.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah. A few of them have had their scopes sort of as we had more time post being funded to refine them a little bit. But they were each funded last year.
And there's a few that we discussed on the staff side last year that at the time we felt were not timely. You know, just need a little more time after a change or after something, a different project had finished or whatever it was. So those are things that are on the list for reconsideration this year, whether or not they go forward this year or again is pushed another year remains to be seen. But that's another thing that we consider on our end is, how does this fit in with all of the other projects that are going on? How does it fit in with other infrastructure improvements or other outreach projects or whatever it is? And there's occasional things that don't, the timing is just not right. So there's a handful that we're looking at again for this year that we didn't bring to the planning commission last year for that reason. So you may see things that for us are repeat discussions, but for you will be a new discussion because it didn't come up.
Has there been any discussion, and this is probably from several years ago, but some way and to use the planning money to really help kind of coordinate all the different parks and natural areas and that the whole county has. Beyond not, and it's, we're kind of building off just near the southeast quadrant, there's a gazillion acres that are all connected, and how do we have appropriate, access and parking that's kind of organized among all those towns, it's Williston, Shelburne, and Charlotte, and South Burlington, and
Yeah, that's a good point. So there
I
is
can't
a
remember
group called
what
the,
went
it's
anywhere.
called the Regional Conservation Partnership.
Yes, I think,
That is a group of, they meet actually in this room, of us, St. George, Shelburne, Williston, Heinsberg, and the Regional Planning Commission, to do those kinds
oh,
of
so
things.
they're already doing it.
Well, they've been involved with it in
Kind
the
of.
past. I think it is, I have a meeting with them at the end of this week to go over some of these things. Whether they have an active role today, I don't know. And certainly that would be the kind of thing that's not on the transportation side, but it's also in their work area. To put in that we would like for them to be actively helping take the next steps of that. Yeah,
Well, that would be an interest of mine.
Yeah.
Just,
I can at least float it and see.
Oh, on a similar note, you remind me of one thing, I guess, maybe we already have been talking about this a lot, but, of how sort of our city bike ped plan relates more towards the regional bike ped plan, the RPC. The reason I guess I was thinking about this a lot was, maybe I'm mistaken, but I remember we're planning on putting in completing the sidewalk from Kennedy Drive, on Route 2 from Kennedy Drive to Shunpike Road, like, I think that's currently in our walk bike plan. If you look up for the RPC's plan, they're ultimately, this is one of the highest priority bike corridors, because eventually they want to essentially connect Williston Taft corridors to downtown Burlington with bike facilities.
Right.
My initial thought was, I'm sure it has regional funding. From our perspective, yeah, sidewalks should be fine. From a regional perspective, maybe that should be the shared use path. So I don't know if this is the time or place to talk about it, but there's just sometimes I felt that some of our internal decisions on what bike ped infrastructure makes sense from a city perspective, not necessarily a regional perspective. But maybe it's ours, maybe that's just, sounds on my mind.
Thank you.
Yeah, and something I'm now blanking on whether you mentioned this or not, but UPWP, there are different ways you can get funded. You can get funded for getting consultant money from the federal government through the RPC for a one-town project. You can also get you can get hours of RPC staff time, but you can also do, if it's a multi-municipality project, it just changes the funding calculus a little bit. So something like that may be something to consider.
Right, well, specifically, a couple of years ago, we did Queen City Park Road in South Burlington and Burlington.
Right.
And right now, we're doing one of where Farrell meets Home Avenue.
Yeah.
So that's exactly, I mean, it's not it's at that end instead of that end, but same connectivity challenge.
Yeah.
Just pointing out that the UPWP money can be funded to multi-municipality projects that do sort of consider that regional connection a bit better than if we did something and then Williston did something, it may be more effective for us to do it together as one project.
Exactly. Yeah.
Last item we have for you tonight. Last month now, I guess. Last month, the city council adopted updates to the electrical safety ordinance and the life safety ordinance that the fire department takes care of. That extends jurisdiction for electrical permits and building permits to the one area that they did not previously have jurisdiction over, which is owner occupied single family homes. So new homes and construction over $5,000 of improvements now requires likely both, but electrical and or building permits. And electrical is, there's no bottom threshold, it's anything electrical. So one of the things that has had us looking at is what is the value and importance of a zoning permit for specifically interior renovations. So if you're just remodeling your kitchen today, that's a zoning permit. It's not a change of use, you're not adding bedrooms, you're not adding wastewater. We are thinking that the threshold of $5,000 and or its existence at all is either the threshold is far too low, or it may be that it's a redundant permitting. Because in the past, this was the only way that we knew that something was happening. Now there is a person doing a life safety inspection. And that is a separate permit that with a separate fee. So we are examining pretty closely the removal or substantial raising of the bars to the threshold for that. That's in the land development regulations, so this would directly be your call. But we wanted to just sort of float that is the thing we're looking at, because we want to be effective government, not just government that does it the way we've done it, because it's always the way we've done it, and we're not seeing a lot of value add to our residents in it, frankly.
I like the idea, yeah. I mean,
Redundancy is not necessary.
or else the whole point of RDRs is essentially to prevent adverse impacts on the community. And I'm not sure how much internal renovations, what the potential to adversely affect your community would
Right.
be.
If it's a change of use in the building,
Sure.
or there's an addition to the building, or they're adding bedrooms, there are implications, but if you're just.
Installing a new kitchen.
Right, right.
Yeah, right now we're getting permits for, oh, sorry, Jessica.
Oh, I always thought that was silly, like, if you're just trying to like change your appliances, you know,
Right.
that's the.
Or upgrade the apple, put in new fixtures and all of a sudden.
Right.
So if someone really wants to be by the books, I mean, at this point, with what labor and materials costs, like a painting project might trigger a zoning permit. And-
You have $500. I think
Yeah,
so.
you don't have to painting, like, yeah, flooring project.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That'd be fun.
All right, we'll proceed. We will, as we prepare for our next round of amendments, we'll have some specific recommendations for you on that.
So we have minutes of October 28th.
Move to approve.
Second,
Any comments?
No.
there's
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
That was unanimous, so we don't need the roll call. And we are adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.